Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, death slicers, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And let's go to the good old USA and talk about nepotism and dynasties. And one of the things that came out of these WikiLeaks leaks and emails, particularly involving John Podesta, are some of the kind of mundane things. And one of the mundane things was the hundreds of mundane emails in which petitioners for this or that plum Washington job or high-profile academic appointment showed up. And I was kind of fascinated by this because I think that's one of the aspects of government and we don't talk about enough. And that's this just kind of a parasite industry. All these leeches that show up, and the higher up some of these people go up in the ladder, particularly somebody like John Podesta, more people they have contact them, particularly people who donate and want some plum jobs for their kids or their family or people they know. And so let's get back to this article a little bit more. People try to arrange jobs for themselves and their kids points towards a fundamental thing we know about the people at the top of this class. Their loyalty to one another and the way it overrides everything else. People at the top tier of American life all know each other. They are all engaged in promoting each other and each other's careers constantly. And I think that is one of the more important paragraphs I've read because it really displays something that I've talked about repeatedly, and that's the fact that we have more of a class war going on globally, and people need to be aware of that, and that the allegiance amongst the elites, there's sometimes this depiction that there's some sort of competition, but I assure you at the end of the day, and this goes for that whole false paradigm of the Republicrats and the Dempublicans as well, at the end of the day, they have an allegiance to their class. They don't have an allegiance to other classes, and so that's one of the reasons why we know government has an allegiance to each other, people in the government, and not to the people, unless you consider the people the spawn of these businessmen and these career politicians. And so we go further into this article, and it points out that everything in this world blurs together. The State Department, the banks, Silicon Valley, the nonprofits, executives go from foundation to government to think tank to startup. There are honors, venture capital, foundation grants, endowment chairs, advanced degrees, the doors revolve, their friends all succeed. And that brings up another point that ties in this whole thing. The upper echelons of government, the upper echelons of business, these so-called think tanks, these foundations, these nonprofits, the college system, it's all a system set up for these people and their class and the elites, and it's all one playground for them. And they populate these areas, and then they bring in all their connections and their spawn and all their family and their friends, and this is how we end up with dynasties, and we end up with nepotism. So I thought that was intriguing to get a glimpse of that in these John Podesta emails and these WikiLeaks and these leaks, and how this stuff comes out and clarifies exactly that. These upper echelons are just crawling with weasels and parasites and leeches. And a good example of that is somebody like, for example, like Elizabeth Cheney. When Dick Cheney was vice president, he created a position for her, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs and Coordinator for broader Middle Eastern and North African initiatives. And so, wow, what a title, what a great job by Dick Cheney creating this position for her and getting Elizabeth into the government, even though she really had no experience in that area. And there's other examples. We look at Chelsea Clinton, of course, getting a job at one of the networks and getting paid something like $365,000 for 5 minutes of inane commentary, just marketing her brand. And that's what's important to remember. These people are all brands. But funny too, Elizabeth Cheney, her husband, was chief counsel for the Office of Budget Management at the time as well. So everybody gets their connections met up, and once one gets their foot in the door, then it's not too hard to get other people in the door. Other examples of that are ways that during campaigns, for example, they hire their family members. Representative Louis Gohmert, a Republican from Texas, hired his wife as a campaign manager and paid her $21,000 over 4 months, and then she got a $8,000 bonus. Representative Ron Lewis, a Republican from Kentucky, paid his wife $40,000 a year to be his campaign manager. And of course, campaign manager, one of the famous ones, Tom DeLay, his wife and daughter got $500,000 from a super PAC that he set up, and his daughter, consulting firm, got $222,000 from contracting with that same PAC. So there's so many ways that they can use these positions to create layers and layers of nepotism. In 2005, 17 senators, all and 11 members of the House, had children or spouses who worked as lobbyists. Harry Reid being a notable example. Hundreds of examples of congressmen and government workers who hire their mothers, their brothers, their sisters, their daughters, their sons, their cousins, their friends, their wives, and their husbands, let alone all the placements by friends and contacts. So no surprise that we have just layers and layers of nepotism and dynasties created by these situations. Because, for example, one family member certainly might move on, but the other family members and people they help out continue to live on in the bureaucratic monolith that has a life of its own. I remember hearing about Mayor Richard Daley, Chicago. I think he had something like 260 members of his extended family in different government positions in the Chicago government. And this whole law, there's supposed to be a law about nepotism that came after John and Bobby Kennedy both served in the government. So we have laws supposedly preventing this sort of thing, but of course it doesn't prevent it. There's so many ways to bypass it. A good example of Chelsea Clinton's wedding being paid from the Clinton Foundation, and her husband's hedge fund being helped out by the Clinton Foundation and the government, and these intertwinement of public and private life that we see with these people. And to get into a really heinous list, a good example of how dynasties and nepotism work is we have members of the government and Congress whose father were governors. Judd Gregg, Olympia Snow, Russ Carnahan, Shelley Moore Capito, Jim Cooper, Jim Matheson, and then congressmen who are brothers. Dan Mika and John Mika, Philip Crane and Daniel Crane, Carl Levin and Sander Levin, Ken Salazar, John Salazar, Lincoln Diaz, and Maria Diaz. And then to get a good taste of nepotism and dynasties, how many members of Congress had fathers who were congressmen? And that's Charlie Bass, John J. Rhodes, Barry Goldwater, John D. Dingle, John Lizinski, Lucille Roybal, Chris Dodd, William Clay Jr., Evan Bay, Charlie Gonzalez, John Keel, Lincoln D. Chaffee, Mark Pryor, Robert F. Bennett, Dan Bourne, Connie Mack, Rush Holt, William Schuster, William B. Jones, John Duncan, James T. Walsh, Mark Pryor, Daniel Lipinski, Alan Mullihan, Mark Udall, John Sarbanes, Cynthia McKinney, Al Gore, and Lisa Murkowski all had fathers who were congressmen as well. And so there's a clear example, nearly 30 members of Congress whose fathers in Congress, and a lot of these you can also trace it back to their grandfathers as well. So there we have it, just a little glimpse at how dynasties are created beyond the obvious ones with the Bushes and the Bush dynasty in our government, as well as the Clintons and their dynasty in the government, which may not end. Hillary and Bill might be done for now, but Chelsea certainly may have some plans in the future. And then nepotism, like I say, very interesting to see this John Podesta emails and see this mundane clamoring of their class and the elites and their kids and their spawn and their larvae all getting plum jobs all over the place. And we'll continue seeing that as time goes on, because that's just the nature of the beast. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?